Welcome to Bookswell Intersections. I'm your host, Cody Sisco, and today I'm here with guest Tisha Reichle-Aguilera. Tisha, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Cody.
Tisha is a former rodeo queen, and we're going to talk about her book today, Breaking Pattern, which is a YA novel about a rodeo queen growing up in the Inland Empire. Well, we'll get into it in a minute. Lots of horses, lots of teenage drama. But maybe we can start with what is a rodeo queen? How does that work?
So just to clarify, in the book, she's not a rodeo queen. This is a common misconception that because I was, she's not. She actually, as I did, actively rejects this idea of the queenness. And a lot of it is because the queenness is about big hair and being pretty, lots of makeup, lots of bling and sparkly, especially in the 80s. Like everything was bling. Not that it's not blinged out today.
Like really big hair.
Big hair. Even though you then smash it all down with a cowboy hat, it still has to be the big hair. And so Adriana, the main character, she actively rejects this. And she is much more interested in the competitions, actually angry because in that time in their community, girls weren't allowed to do like saddle bronc riding or bull riding because they were girls. When we were younger, we could do calf riding, and that was even too dangerous for some parents. A friend of ours broke her leg that way, and then the moms were like, no more girls riding calves with the intention of learning how to be bull riders. So I genuinely believe that I could have been a famous, maybe not bull rider, but my goal was saddle bronc riding, and it just didn't pan out because, I was a girl, and that just didn't happen. But Adriana, it competes in junior rodeo events in a fictional town called Runnel Valley, which is set, as you said, in the Inland Empire. I actually grew up as far inland as you can get and still be part of the empire in Blythe. So I used to compete in gymkhanas and junior rodeos. And so I wrote a story about that, about a girl who does this. And at a friend's insistence, it became a young adult novel. And I didn't write this alone. I had a lot of support. My sister was a fact checker. Another writer friend insisted that there needed to be a stronger romantic element. So I've had a lot of support along the way, turning this character into someone who is not me and who is turning the story into a complete novel. So.
Yeah. I mean, she was a joy to follow because she was so bold. Like she was fearless. And I came to understand the dangers of this sport, which I didn't know anything about. So like for me, it was like, oh, I get to spend time with horses and like this fun community. And I was wondering like about, so at the beginning, she has this horse named Pearl, who is maybe like aging and so can't do a lot of the stuff like to the same level as she used to. That becomes a big part of the story, right? Is Adriana's relationship to Pearl and to other horses in her orbit.
So Pearl is what her cousin refers to as a hand-me-down horse. There's actually a piece of short fiction that was published separately from the novel that is kind of like this character's origin story. And her cousin, her uncle gives her this horse, and that's how she gets interested or how she starts first riding. And the cousin, who is all things opposite, she's a cheerleader once they get to high school. She is delicate and fragile and all concerned about her makeup and hair, the way that Adriana's mom wants her to be. But Adriana doesn't care about all that. She cares about the horses, and Pearl is her confidant. Pearl is the other entity she would rather spend her time with, more than even other people her own age, let alone school. She doesn't like school. I think that's normal. I taught high school for 20 years, and I think young people love what they're good at. And she's good at the horse stuff, not just the riding, but like she understands animals. She can communicate with them. She has this relationship where even as Pearl's aging, she still has a lot of emotional attachment to not completely abandoning this horse, right? Because even though she knows she needs a faster horse to be competitive, she starts thinking about ways that Pearl can still be part of her life. She uses Pearl to help her train some peewee riders. She realizes also that she is able to use Pearl as a team roping horse. And it just so happens, coincidentally, team roping gets added to their junior rodeo events about halfway through the season, or part way through what we're seeing. And for those people unfamiliar with team roping, so mostly what she does are individual sports. She does barrel racing, which is probably the one people are most familiar with if they've ever seen any kind of rodeo, because it's the only event in big rodeos that women used to be allowed to compete in, was barrel racing. But in their junior rodeos and in local gymkhanas, they also participate in things like pole bending, goat tying, and calf breakaway roping. Calf breakaway roping is where you're atop the horse and the rope is attached to the saddle horn, so that once the rider catches, that rope breaks and the time ends. And so she did that kind of roping. But the catch is Adriana's left-handed. So Pearl doesn't have to be that fast to be a horse that she can heel. In team roping, it's two people, a header and a heeler. So the header would do the same thing as someone did in calf breakaway, catch it, but then they would dally and turn so that another roper could come in and rope the heels of the calf. So you've got a rope around their neck and a rope around their heels, and that's when the time ends. Pearl doesn't have to be fast. She just has to take a few leaps, and Adriana was so good that she could just, because she's also left-handed, and the trajectory of the calf makes it so the calf is more likely to step into her loop.
Oh, interesting.
So she does these things that she wants to keep Pearl, and when she contemplates selling her, it's devastating for her. Even more devastating than other losses or than other changes in her life. I don't want to give too much away. I don't know how much, what's it called? Like, we're telling the story. What's it called? Spoiler alerts we're having here.
No spoilers. You know, there's the sense I get that Adriana is like caregiving. Like, she's caring for these horses. She's like, when they get injured, she's caring for them, and she's learning almost maybe on the path to like veterinarian. If so, yes. You know, that's one possible trajectory for her. We don't know where she'll end up, but you know, it's striking to me that she is doing this because in her life there are, let's say, you know, her mom's a bit absent, right? Mm-hmm. As a caregiver, as a mother, like they get into a lot of conflict, and I want to talk about that. Sure. But then there are these other figures in her life who kind of step in, you know, in a limited basis to kind of play more of a like parental role. You know, her father works all the time. She doesn't see him that much, although she cares for him deeply. So, I mean, that's maybe part of how her independent spirit like shines, is that she's not, I mean, I don't know, is she raising herself in a way? Or
I think in a lot of ways. I think her mother is a very traditional mother who struggles with that notion of being a traditional mother. And again, not to spoil what happens with the mom, but they have always had a contentious relationship. And it's rooted in, at least initially, what we know and what Adriana understands is that it's rooted in that Adriana is not the daughter she wanted. Adriana refused to have a quinceañera. Adriana doesn't want to cook with her mother. Her mother works in restaurants and has a side business making food products, salsas and other things. And Adriana doesn't care about pretty dresses and things like those things that were expectations of young girls in the 1980s and are still for many young girls today. And so because Adriana didn't fit in that, her and her mother have always had this tension. And so she naturally gravitated towards her dad, even though he wasn't always around. Her dad let her drive the truck, even though she didn't have a driver's license. And for those of you who grew up in the 80s in small towns, you're like, oh yeah, of course, because that's what we did. I started driving. I knew how to drive when I was like 14 years old, and I did. Now, my parents didn't let us go out driving on the highway, and I never stole my parents' truck until I was older, much older, and already had a license. But
the statute of limitations says probably.
Yeah, and my dad thinks it's funny now. My mom, not so much, but my dad now thinks it's funny. Oh yeah, you guys did that. But they are parents who offer all the support they can, right? The dad works so much because he's providing that financial support. And what Adriana doesn't realize initially that she comes to understand is that they made a lot of sacrifices because competing in these junior rodeos is very expensive.
Yes.
And even though they're not a wealthy family, like some of the other families that she competes against, and there's some very obvious markers throughout the text, like about these social class distinctions, Adriana's parents do what they can to parent. But it requires then, as you said, that she has to do a lot of that on her own. She relies very heavily on the family friend Fiona, who has the space for Adriana to keep her horse there in exchange for Adriana learning how to work. So it's not like she's getting, oh, here's this free room and board for your horse and you get taken care of and pampered. No, she's there every day cleaning and when Fiona goes out of town, she takes care of Fiona's chickens. She takes care of her own goats too, and she hates them because I don't know. For all of you out there who know goats, you know they're dumb. Sheep and goats are just dumb creatures, and they're annoying creatures. They serve a purpose, don't get me wrong, but they're dumb. So she's very like annoyed with the goats at the beginning, and then learns to like empathize with one of the goats, the child goat, when the goat's mother has more children, has more kids.
That was a very vivid scene. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that was really hard to write. You know, we talk about like, is this autobiographical? It's fiction. It's surely fiction. Are there elements from my own life? Of course there are, because that's my lived experiences growing up with these animals. I'm also the oldest child of 4. So as you can imagine, not only my parents very supportive of all the rodeo things, but I also had to do a lot of parenting of my younger siblings once my mom went back to work. And so there's a lot of that kind of that echoes throughout the novel, I think. But her parenting by the other women who live, Fiona and her partner, Barb, her friend, Barb, because it's the E's and there's just things you don't say, you know, and Barb lives there, and she considers Fiona and Barb family, and they teach her these things. Barb is a farrier. That's, for those of you who don't know, that's the person who takes care of the horse's feet. But Barb also knows a lot about other animals. And so they teach her a lot, and they encourage her to pursue this interest in becoming a veterinarian.
Mm-hmm.
When the local vet comes and can't touch the horse that Fiona and Adriana rescue, Adriana has to do it, because this horse is afraid of men. The veterinarian is also named after the veterinarian from the town where I grew up in Blythe.
Okay.
And funny side note, when I went to teach a playwriting workshop at my old high school just last year, one of the students in my class, the class that I was teaching in, I was just a guest there like once a month. She showed up when I had my book release in that town. Like I did like a little booth at like a community event.
Yeah.
And she's like, Dr. T, I want a book, but I'm waiting for my grandpa. He's going to bring the money. And I was like, okay, sweetheart. She walks away. My mom's all, you could have given her the book. I said, if her grandpa doesn't show up before we close, I will. Like, she was my student, but if her grandpa's going to bring me $20, I'm going to take the $20. And her grandpa, she walks back up with her grandpa, and I looked up and I almost lost it. You know, I'm not much of like a crier, but all my insides were crying. And I looked at her and I said, your grandpa's Dr. Steve? She's all, yeah, he was the veterinarian. And I looked at her and I whispered, I was like, don't tell him right now because I'll start crying, but I named the veterinarian in the book after him. Her eyes got so big. And all this time, my dad was talking to him, and I'm just watching this man talk to my dad because I remembered his voice all these years. Like when I read the book, that's his voice I read it in. And I was just like trying to sign this little girl's book and watching this man talk to my dad. And I was like, whoa. That's too real. Yeah, he used to take care of our animals. There were 2 veterinarians, but he was the one, when I was in high school, he was the one who took care of our horses. He took care of our 4-H animals. But it was just bizarre to because it's fiction and it was so long ago. I think I had kind of disconnected from the reality of it until it was staring me in the face. And so I handed her a book and I was like, hi, Dr. Steve, like starstruck. Here's the man who's in my book. Oh my gosh. I really got off on a tangent here, but it was just that moment of, and I wanted to be a veterinarian until I actually had to do like medical work on one of the horses. We had a
work.
It was gross. It was disgusting. I was like, yeah, I don't want to do this. This is like really dirty, and I don't like to be dirty anymore.
I love this book, but viscerally, there were some moments where I was like, okay, that's some fluids or whatever. And
gross. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. But, you know, that was our life, and it was real. That's one of my goals, is to capture that kind of raw reality, I guess.
Yep. I could smell the dirty hay.
Uh-huh. Everything always smells dirty. You just get used to it.
Yeah. That I want to come back to. How you did this so well was like depict the way that the sort of like different means, the class divisions within this community, like played out in like very subtle but apparent ways.
Okay.
Who had access to the nice horses,
right?
The clothes that they were wearing, like who sat where on the stands, and it just draws this picture of like, you know, people are complicated and kind of silly, but class really affects like how we do everything day to day.
I feel like that's not something I was necessarily aware of in that time period. Growing up, I don't think I realized it to the extent that I do now, right? You look back on it and you're like, oh, damn. Like I see now the distinctions between the way that we grew up. My dad is a mechanic. He's retired now, but he's a mechanic. My mom was what we used to call a secretary. Eventually, both went to work at a state prison near our town. And so I think socioeconomics and social class, well, it is technically measured by money. I think it's not always about the dollar sign, because I've said to people before, I could make $1 million and I would still be a working class person. I have a PhD, for goodness sakes. And I still I don't think I will ever fit into a world where that is always the reality. Like I just don't have that in me. I'm from a trailer, on a dirt road, gravel road. My mom hates when I say trailer on a dirt road. Like, but it's true. It's a modular home on a gravel road. That's, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so I think that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I've lived in Los Angeles for 35 years. That's still at the core of who I am, And so I really try to make that part of the story without making it the whole story. And because I think it's really important that the competition that's happening for Adriana is, yes, it's how fast can I go on my horse? How fast can Pro run around these barrels? How skilled can I be at roping these calves? But it's also about how can we, those of us who don't come from money, how can we be as successful as those who have every advantage? As the kid who pulls up, and this is not really a spoiler because it happens in the first chapter, who pulls up in a brand new truck and trailer. And this may seem like no big deal to people now who are like, oh yeah, new cars, paint job all the time. We didn't. There was an old truck with an old trailer, both probably used. And this kid pulls up and it's like the most beautiful paint job. It's black and gray and it matches the trailer. The trailer has a dressing room on it. The first time I ever saw one of those, I was like, well, why don't we have that? Why do I got to change in the outhouse? Because that's where you do in most rodeos. If you got to change out of your pajamas or laying down on the back seat of the truck trying to put your jeans on so nobody sees you. It's just those kinds of things that when you're a kid, you're like, oh yeah, that they have that and we don't. But looking back on it, I realized that it also made things a lot harder on my parents.
I bet. Yeah.
Those horses weren't cheap. My dad, I learned later, my dad used to go out and get a discount for buying broken bales from some of the hay farmers in the area. Now, we lived in a rural area, so there were hay and, he could go out and he could pick it up himself. But when people ask me, why did you stop writing? And I was like, do you know how expensive that is? I was a college student, first of all, when I came to LA and on scholarship and living in and here you have to board horses somewhere far. That's more money, right? Gas driving.
Back then, maybe the valley, and now maybe not as much, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Things have moved to the periphery.
Yes, absolutely. And I probably could have kept horses near where my tia lives in Riverside. We did a lot of our 4-H activities in Riverside because Blythe is part of Riverside County. Okay. And so when I say as far east as inland as you can get, then it's Blythe and then it's Arizona.
Yeah.
But when my niece asked me, this was my niece, I was already out of college, an adult, and my niece is like, yeah, don't you miss the competition? Don't you miss? And I was like, sometimes, but I don't miss the work. And at the time, she was going out where her aunt, grandma's sister-in-law, so an aunt, had kept horses. I was like, you get there and the horses are groomed and saddled and you just get to ride. You don't have to shovel manure before school. Yes, you don't have to do all that labor. It's a lot of labor. And I feel like there are people who ride who don't have to do that labor. And so for us, it was a job. And don't get me wrong, it was a job I loved. It was a lot of fun. I still some of the friends that I had then, when I run into them, or the older brother of a friend, I just saw him at a birthday party and I walked over to say hi. And it's no time has passed because there's something that bonds you with the people who go through this struggle with you. Right. And so I don't know if I totally answered your question about the class issues, but
Yeah, it seems like the competition is more than about like the race or the activity on the day of. It's like, how do you organize your life and your community rallies around you to like create the environment where you can actually just learn a skill and do it and have everything you need for it. So I appreciated that bit of it. I want to go back to this question of like gender norms, because back in the 80s things were less fluid. We had less freedom to be ourselves if we were sort of like, going against the stereotypes. And you have in the book Maritza, who is kind of like the ultimate, like, I'm a girl and I want to be girly and I want like my quinceañera to be perfect. And she puts a lot of pressure on Adriana. But there's like some side comments like around like, oh, like, oh, those shoes, really?
Yeah.
Right. Some of the shade, but I feel like you also you left out some of what I remember from that time period that I think a lot of people experienced, which is like the bullying, right? If you were a tomboy or if you were like a femme guy, like you got pretty mercilessly harassed. And so I think that I was grateful to not have to relive that in your book.
Well, good. I'm glad. I think it's also that for Adriana, she also surrounds herself at school with like-minded people, right? So at school, the people she hangs out with are Eric, her who also competes with them, and Haley, the new person, and Bianca. And so they're all at school together and they kind of rally around each other. And I think the only like real school bullying that starts to occur is when some other girls are talking trash about Maritza, because Maritza is very flirtatious. She's very boy crazy. That was a thing. That's how we called it back then, boy crazy. I don't think that's even a term that's used anymore. But she was that girl, right? Like she wanted a boyfriend so bad. She needed a boyfriend. It turns out he was older and he wanted one thing from her. And so Adriana has to step up and defend her cousin from that kind of social pressure. But for her, because they all kind of created this insular world, the other people didn't matter as much. And I think it was the same. Their pressure, that bullying happened more in her rodeo world, right? I think it's also that Adriana didn't care about school enough for that to be, if someone at school had been rude or disrespectful, I think she would just kind of like, well, I don't want to be here anyway. I'm only doing it because I have to. Yeah. And so I think that having that tension occur in the rodeo world, and again, I don't want to spoil it, but when that kind of confrontation happens, she relies on those skills. They rally together. They come together to support one another so that they can triumph. Maybe not necessarily Adriana, but so that as a community. And I think that kind of speaks a lot to, the way I grew up. Like we rallied around each other, and not just in rodeo world, but I feel like I'm from a small town. It's isolated from everything else. So people talked a lot of trash. We would go, I didn't play sports, but I would travel to go watch friends who played, and other schools, they talked a lot of trash because we were way out there. And even, I guess, sometimes in rodeos, they dismissed us because we were from way out there. But yeah, you don't dismiss me much when you see how many belt buckles I have. And I was riding a horse we broke after the hand-me-down horse. I rode a horse that we broke ourselves, that my dad got. And it, that's what we did. We did it, and we persisted, and we didn't let anybody take us down in that way.
Yeah. So you said you broke a horse, which I don't know the terminology. I guess that means like you train them, you get them ready. Like they now know, like when you do the rein one way, they go one way. But I wanted to ask you, and I've wanted to ask you this for a while, about the title Breaking Pattern. And I kind of get it in like the metaphorical way. Okay, like you're going off, you're doing something different. But what is the connection to like horse stuff?
So I try to build this in. This is like one of the titles I'm most proud of. I'm looking down because I put the book here so I can touch it.
Yeah.
I am notorious for not doing titles well. I can ask anyone who's ever been in a writing group with me. I'm like, the title is just the file name. It's terrible. Somebody help me, But breaking pattern in a rodeo, or in a junior rodeo specifically, is when the horse and rider don't follow the designated path. So, for example, it happens occasionally in barrel racing, and I'll start with that because that's what people are most familiar with. It's 3 barrels set up in a cloverleaf pattern. And if a rider goes to the wrong side of the barrel, then they are disqualified. They broke pattern. That doesn't happen unless someone is very new and isn't in control of a horse. Like a young rider might do it because they don't really know. Like when one of the Pee-wee's riders does this because they don't know. They're kids. They're just like, I'm just on the horse and it's moving and eventually it's going to get where it's going. But also if you're on, like when Adriana's training a new horse, or there's occasions where a horse has been trained, but the rider isn't experienced enough to handle that trained horse. And so in pole bending, which is the image on the cover of the book,
yeah,
the horse and rider weave in between. There's 6 of those, and they weave in between them. And if the horse doesn't make that switch back and forth, then that would be considered breaking pattern. And again, an experienced rider isn't going to do it very often, but it does happen. A little bit of a spoiler when Adriana's training a new horse.
And you're not supposed to touch the poles either. Is that
if you touch the poles or the barrels, you can touch them, but if they fall over, there's a penalty. Okay. So you still you're not disqualified, but there is a 5-second penalty, 2-second penalty, 5-second penalty on barrels. And depending on the rodeo world that you're in, depending on the rules and regulations, there's a penalty for knocking down a pole. But that's a disqualification. So the title is about this rodeo event, like where you get disqualified, but it's also about, as you noted, breaking those societal patterns. She breaks the gender patterns, which we've talked about, social class patterns. Rodeo is an expensive sport. You don't often see as many working class people who compete in it consistently. Not that they're not there, they are, but they might not be doing it to the level that she's doing it. You might also not see very many people of color in a lot of junior rodeos, especially in the 1980s. I think that has changed. In doing research for the book, as I was writing, one of the things I like to do is drive out to Riverside and sit at a rodeo. I was the weird lady in the stands with my tennis shoes on because I don't even own cowboy boots anymore. They hurt my toes. And so I would be sitting there with my notebook, just writing, just looking.
That's classic author behavior, right? Like there's a scene and you're just taking some notes.
You got to get there. You got to smell it. You got to hear it. You got to feel it.
Yep.
And so I feel like the other patterns are these, not just the gendered patterns, but these patterns of like societal interaction. Like what were the expectations when...
Yeah. I would say, like part of one of the main threads I think that you're pulling on in the book is around like the relationship between Adriana and her mother, which again, I don't want to get into the spoilers, but it's very much not the typical interactions between them, let's say.
And you find out later in the book why. Like you learn a little bit. It's a YA novel, so the focus is clearly on Adriana and these teenagers. But I feel like it's important to understand that the mother's behavior isn't just she's a bad mother. She's experienced trauma. And because of that trauma that Adriana doesn't know about until later in the novel, when Adriana finds out, she does try to kind of negotiate a different kind of relationship. Yeah. But it's at the point where she has to make a choice. Yeah. And in the end, she has to make a choice. My family, my mom and my dad, or the rodeo life. She can't have both.
Yeah.
And this is probably a good time. I know you do. Everyone does. This is a good time to say that I have started outlining the sequel to Breaking Pattern.
Yeah.
I have had several readers who are like, wait, I need to know what happens next. And I'm like, well, I don't know what happens next.
Yeah, so wait till the book's out.
I started working on what happens next, but that is really like where we end up, right? Like, this is a really difficult choice.
And just the portrait of parents as flawed individuals who try their best and still, fuck up in pretty significant ways because of what they've been through that they don't tell or talk about their children, which is like the other kind of big thing here is around like what is discussed and what is just like swept under the rug.
Well, and we talk about that a lot. My sister and I, she's also my consultant on the sequel. We talk about that a lot in general in our lives, like how fortunate this next generation of children are. And I didn't birth children, but I have a brother who's 20 years younger.
Right.
My sister's oldest, my nephew, they were my boys. Shout out to them. And then my sister has daughters that I've been around since birth. And so watching her parent so differently than, and no shade to my own parents, that's the way things were done, right? It was the 80s. You don't talk about things. Even now, I think it's difficult for my parents how open we all are with a lot of things about sexuality, about our health, about socioeconomic issues, just about the life choices that we make. And I think that we have a choice to carry that generational trauma. And I know the kind of childhood my parents both had. I've pieced together enough to know that it wasn't all sunshine and roses. Was it great? Yes, they grew up in small towns. But I think there's things that we have to make a choice. My generation, my sister and I, when we talk about this, we have to make a choice about, do we continue or do we try to learn from that and move forward? Like, how do we break that cycle of generational shame, a lot of shame around social class issues and trauma. And so just really thinking about how we move forward. And I feel like, or at least I hope that the novel offers that, not just this is the way it was, but this is how it can start to change. Having these conversations about the issues surrounding the mother-daughter tension and even the father-daughter tension. Like, she does live not to disappoint him and wants to be in his presence, but he also has other obligations of work and can't always be the support person that she needs.
Well, because it's Pride Month, I want to say thank you for being such an amazing ally to the community. And I very much appreciated the Fiona Barb kind of story and interaction, because those, like, that type of like hidden relationship just, needs to shine more like in the public eye, I think. And you also, you included with Eric, I don't think this is a spoiler, a moment where Adriana realizes like, oh, he's not interested in me for a reason.
Like, he can't be my boyfriend, even though everyone expects him to be or assumes he is. Like, it's the assumption. It's her best friend. They're in high school. And the assumption is, oh, that's just going to be your boyfriend. Both family, the families assume this.
We don't know how to have non-romantic, heterosexual relationships.
It's not a thing. And I'm glad that you appreciated Fiona and Barb. They are, without a doubt, two of my favorite characters. And I'm going to tell you a funny story. If Wanda Sykes ever sees this, Wanda actually messaged on Instagram, because Wanda Sykes was the image I had in my head of Barb. Like, I love her stand up. I love the roles that she's played in different places. And then I saw Wanda and her partner on Instagram, and I was like, oh my God, that's Fiona. Like, I was like, how did I had never seen, but that's just, it was such a beautiful moment. So if anyone out there wants to make a movie, please cast Wanda Sykes and her partner as Barb and Fiona, because Barb is kind of like that no nonsense, quit your crying about whatever is bothering you and get your shit together. She's that figure in Adriana's life. And I hesitate to use the word mother figure, because as a person who's not biologically a mother, I feel like people always want to make me one. I'm like, but I'm not. I'm a great tia. I'm the best tia. You can ask any of my nieces and nephews. I'm the best tia on earth. You can ask my friends' kids. I'm the best one. So I don't care what anybody else says.
It's that wisdom you get, right?
Right. And so, but I feel like there's a tendency in our society to make every woman like, oh, but you're like a mother to. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm a teacher. Yeah. I have taught thousands of teenagers, but I'm not their mother. And that's a very different role. And I kind of resent that I have to, like, I'm incomplete without being a mother. I'm not. I'm good. And I've played my role. And so I don't think that Barb and Fiona are mother figures. I think they are mentors. I think they are guides for her into this professional world guides for Adriana in this professional world that she wants to enter. And I think that's really important. They don't necessarily provide what a mother does or should or could provide, but they do. They provide her a safe space to be who she is and offer her the support necessary to learn more about what she wants to do. And I think that's important. And it doesn't have to be mothering.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that, teenagers and kids, part of their journey to adulthood is learning about the different types of relationships we can have that are not those like immediate familial relationships. right? And a lot of those can be, lifelong. They can be what sustain us through horrible times.
Right.
Yeah. And they come in very many different types, not just, not everyone's a mother, like you say. Exactly.
And I also think I take issue because you don't see as often our society fathering people. Like, right? You don't see it in that same way. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, what? I don't need that. Like, people will say Happy Mother's Day, and I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. It needs to be okay that I did not reproduce myself in a child.
Yeah.
I've had enough influence on enough people that I didn't need to have another one of me running around on this planet. So,
well, maybe we missed out on that.
I don't think so.
Well, Tisha, thank you so much for this conversation. I am excited for more readers to get to know.
Hey, thank you so much.
And the community in Breaking Pattern, and excited to know that you're working on a sequel. So
yeah.
Thank you. All right. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.